I look at it like the casinos in Vegas. When you walk in there and you think, oh, I'm going to have some fun, I'm going to play blackjack or craps or whatever, right? They know what they're doing, right? They've built this palace. They have a dealer, a pit boss supervisor, a eye in the sky, a general manager. They're giving you comps. They're doing all those things to get your butt in a seat. They know what they're doing, and you've lost before you've even walked in, right? And I feel like software, we use Salesforce for our intake. These guys are so good and so compelling and know how to sell as well as anybody, that as I've scaled and I have people other than myself negotiating stuff, I now have to just put hard rules, because unless you do, unless it's, they'll come back and tell you, oh, this is the best they can do. And I'm like, okay, well, unless, and again, once you're in, then you're really stuck, because then it's a harder thing, because you don't get out. But like, if you can go with, if there's a new feature you want to add on to something, wait till the end of the quarter, figure out what it takes to not get just raked over the coals. Because as you say, these numbers stay with you. They're annualized, paid up front. I mean, it's brutal, and it does definitely affect the bottom line.
Welcome to the CSG Law Firm Podcast, where we talk all things law firm finance, operations, strategies, and feature those who have dared to embrace bold changes in the legal landscape. I'm your host, Chelsea Williams, founder of Core Solutions Group and chief financial architect for law firms since 2017. I get the rare glimpse behind the curtain and into operations, mindset, and money habits that make or break law firms. Since COVID, everything we thought we knew about how a law firm should run, look, and feel have been shattered. And out of that disruption, a new kind of law firm owner has emerged, one who's bold enough to build outside the box. Around here, we spotlight those renegades, owners who blend legal brilliance with real business strategy, who build boldly, think creatively, and know that money isn't just math, it's mindset. We don't shy away from hard truths. We lean in with curiosity, grit, and a little humor. Whether you're scaling, stabilizing, or just trying to stay sane, you'll find stories, strategies, and straight talk to help you run a more profitable, value-driven law firm. So grab your coffee or your case files and let's get into it. Because it's time to ditch the stuffy suits and take control of your cash flow, build something bold, and prioritize protecting profits in your pocket. Welcome back to Law Firm Money Matters, where we cut through the fluff and say the hard things about building a profitable law firm. Today's guest, Seth Price, is the managing partner at Price Benowitz LLP, which he scaled from 2 lawyers to more than 40 in under a decade. And he's the founder of Blue Shark Digital, a marketing agency built from inside a law firm to deliver results that actually matter. And in this episode, we dig into the fundamentals of scaling your law firm. Why most firms don't have a revenue problem, they have a fundamentals problem. How to avoid wasting your money on shiny new software and random acts of marketing, what it really costs to build a marketing engine that works, and how smart hiring, culture, and even overseas talent can stabilize growth. Seth doesn't sugarcoat the hard truths. He's lived them. So if you're serious about getting past that first million and building a law firm that lasts, lean in. This one's packed with insights you won't want to miss. Welcome back to another episode of Law Firm Money Matters, where we talk about how it's always and never about the money in a way that cuts through the fluff, says the hard things, and shines light around what's working, what's holding us back, and how to do this whole build a profitable law business thing. And part of how we do that is by spotlighting the renegades, like my guest today. If you've ever wondered what it really takes to go from running a small practice to leading a multi-state, multi-million-dollar law firm, and then using that same playbook to build one of the most respected legal marketing agencies in the country, you're about to find out. My guest today, Seth Price, didn't start with unlimited resources, a big brand name, or a massive team. He started with 2 lawyers, a lot of grit, and a clear vision for what was possible. In under a decade, he scaled Price Benowitz LLP to over 40 attorneys, and along the way, he built Blue Shark Digital, a powerhouse marketing agency that delivers real, measurable growth for law firms nationwide. Seth is an AV preeminent rated attorney, a super lawyer, and a nationally recognized speaker on law firm growth, marketing ethics, and digital visibility. He's been on the front lines of scaling, hiring, intake, and marketing in a way that most law firm owners really just wonder about. And he's here to tell us what's really working, what's wasting our money, and what you have to be willing to do if you want to play at the next level. So buckle up because this isn't going to be a fluffy theory. Seth is going to share the hard truths, the pitfalls to avoid, and the moves that actually work in today's competitive market. Seth, I appreciate you lending your time to us today.
Great to be here.
Yes. And so this is actually going to be the second conversation I've ever had with you. I don't know if you remember, but you and I met and talked a little bit at the ABA Tech Show in Chicago a couple of years ago.
I love the tech show. I try to make it in for a day every year just because the conversations there are just tremendous.
Same. Yeah, I discovered that the first year I was in business in 2017, and I've been going every year ever since, except for last year. I missed it because I was in New Zealand, but that was a good reason to miss it.
No, I find that it is not a place where it's almost the opposite of a normal conference where you go to sell your wares, but to find thought leaders who have the time to sit down and have really interesting conversations about like what's next. And I feel like people's guards are down a little bit there because it's not, for the most part, a consumer, feeding frenzy, but rather a B2B, vendor to vendor type of environment, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, and I find it super helpful. I've spent a lot of time in the vendor hall just to kind of see what's new, see what's going on. And I remember the first time I went in 2017, there was one AI booth in the
and
vendor
and
hall.
and, and last and I just did this year in Chicago. It was, two out of three. It
Yeah.
was crazy, and it just what I love is that you have the startup alley and you have all these guys who are just sort of like figuring it out because at most places you see stuff like once it's been figured out to some degree, and here you sort of get an inkling of what's coming next.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? If your goal is to grow and scale a law business, any business, like you have to be willing to be on the front lines to a certain extent. Do you agree?
Yes, and although it's funny because it was very humbled by your intro. I would say I just spoke to somebody yesterday, a longtime friend, somebody I've done business with over the years, who has a very small 1.5 lawyer practice, and it hasn't been able to hit the $500,000 mark. It's in the fours, and they were saying, well, what should I do? And it's they're in two areas of law and this and that. And at the end of the day, you only have so many levers, right? You get more cases in, you turn the marketing up, you squeeze more juice from the orange, your intake is better so that the same marketing gets you more cases. Or you operate the cases so well that you either do better from them in certain areas like PI or maybe upselling more services and family or whatever it may be. But that there are only so many. So I feel fortunate to be able to go to those shows and think from 10,000 feet. I don't know if that's doing people always a favor who are in the trenches. Now, if you want to get there, it's good to see it. Don't get me wrong. But there, like things like software, it's great to know what's coming next. But to me, let's figure out what doesn't crash and burn. Like, don't buy the software the first day it launches. When I start a software company, I probably won't give people that same advice. But the idea is, you're not going to, by getting something the first day, doesn't necessarily mean that because it gives you the opportunity to hit something before it's right, or that may never take off at all. So you have all of that. When it comes to marketing, similar feelings. I'll give you an example. For years, geofencing was pushed. Geofencing meaning the idea that through search, you could put a pin somewhere, for example, for a PI lawyer at an emergency room, or sorry, at a trauma center, and then pick up, or an emergency room, and then pick up all of the search traffic from there. And for 10 years, the people selling it were all really dicey. It was, I remember one guy was like, owned a wine bar and got out of that to do this. If you had invested in every person who brought you that opportunity for 10 years, you would have lost money because it was all nonsense. Today, we're finally at the point where you can do some of those really cool things. So I think there's always a pull and tug between being ahead of the curve when it comes to certain things. And if have a modest sized law practice, figuring out what fundamentals work and then executing the fundamentals. There are people who love the shiny object. I know people, Jay and I, on our podcast, the Law for Brutal, are always talking about people switch software every year. Oh, this is better software. Or this, like, but staying the course with fundamentals can do really, really well and give you something to build on.
I could not agree more, and especially software. So I'm a money person. I get to see behind the curtain into law firm finance. And one of the places that is the most common where I see money flying out the door with no ROI or just completely wasted is in software. And so I could not agree with you more because I feel like software companies, they're always like, there's one new feature and some people will switch just for this one thing, right? But then 3 months later, the software company they left comes out with this feature. And so I think you're right. And what I hear is like always keep your eyes on the front line, keep your ears to the front line. And once something has kind of plateaued, for lack of a better word, and it's kind of safe to jump on board, be prepared to hop in and get on the trend.
And are you making just a lateral move to another mediocre place, or is this something that's really going to move the needle? And I think that it's tough when you're in the trenches to figure that out. I've made the mistakes both ways. We stayed with the software on PI side way too long, and then finally made a move to another one, and that was a great move. Should we have done it sooner? Probably, but when you're in the moment. But I also know the way the pricing goes. I look at it like the casinos in Vegas. When you walk in there and you think, oh, I'm going to have some fun, I'm going to play blackjack or craps or whatever, right? They know what they're doing, right? They've built this palace. They have a dealer, a pit boss supervisor, a eye in the sky, a general manager. They're giving you comps. They're doing all those things to get your butt in a seat. They know what they're doing, and you've lost before you've even walked in, right? And I feel like software, when we use Salesforce for our intake. These guys are so good and so compelling and know how to sell as well as anybody, that as I've scaled and I have people other than myself negotiating stuff, I now have to just put hard rules, because unless you do, they'll come back and tell you, oh, this is the best they can do. And I'm like, okay, well, and again, once you're in, then you're really stuck, because then it's a harder thing because you don't want to get out. But like, if you can if there's a new feature you want to add on to something, wait till the end of the quarter, figure out what it takes to not get just raked over the coals. Because as you say, these numbers stay with you. They're annualized, paid up front. I mean, it's brutal, and it does definitely affect the bottom line.
Yeah, I think there's a cost to moving too fast and having shiny object syndrome for sure. And one of the things you said, kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that I meet with a lot of law firm owners, and the problem is not making more revenue. That the solution is not to make more revenue. The solution is, like you said, to get that fundamental, right? To optimize what you're already doing. And it is definitely a balance between what do I think I need to do? What am I excited to do versus what can I do without spending money, without getting another client, and really optimizing what's already happening in my law firm before the goal becomes make more revenue, hire more people, invest in more software and things like that.
Right. And even within human capital, coming out of COVID, we doubled down on culture and, really found core values that we could all buy into and really dug deep. And that, the idea that not that there's not always turnover, but that reducing turnover, think about how much money you get reducing turnover, and how much money you get when people want to work there, where you're not having to overpay because people will come wanting to be with you. Those are the things that, again, also hit the bottom line that Art talked a lot about. And that if you can find the right person, for example, for intake, that can allow you to go run the rest of the firm, because likely you're not great at intake. You're not going to have the discipline or attention to stay with it. But that if you ignore it at your peril, because that's one of the prongs that if you ignore, right? If you don't have the marketing spigot turned on, if you don't answer the phones, and if you don't run the cases well, those things each have to be happening, and that it's another thing that you can do which will make you more money. So in each of those places, that you can find a way to increase your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was going to be another question of mine for you specifically. I heard on another podcast, Melissa Shanahan's. If you haven't heard of her, listeners, please go check out her podcast. She's amazing. I know
She's
her
awesome.
personally. She does great work.
In fact,
I was
I
listening.
think we got to know each other through tech show. We'd organize a dinner. She did one year and invited me, and the next year we co-hosted the dinner just because you need something to do on that open night of tech show.
Yeah, it was her and Joey V that were like, Chelsea, you need to meet Seth. Like, he has to be in your circle. So yeah, great people. So one of the things you guys were talking about on her podcast was how COVID impacted your firm and your operations and the experience that it brought to you and what you made of it. Can you speak to that?
I mean, it was brutal. We changed again. We had a bunch of things going on, but nothing good. We're in DC, we're in the Northeast, so everything shut down. We went remote overnight. It was miraculous. It didn't fall all apart. Thankfully, by that point, we were on mostly cloud-based software, so that everything could run. I think that I've spoken a lot about this. Your A minus people became A's, but your B minus people became C's and worse.
Mm,
And so it really was a game changer, and adjusting to it. Not that you can't now figure it out, but the whole world changed with that expectations. And things were different. You were in Florida; it was a very different world. I went there for the winter of COVID to escape with the family, and it was great. There was no COVID there, so things just kept going on. But I think in a lot of ways, it forced us to re-examine the firm that had been trudging along because the paradigm shifted, and we needed to create a team that was appropriate for what I'll call the new normal. And that has served us well. Our original practice group, which was criminal, works very well, and that it's disassociated. Lawyers are all over the place. Calls come in. But I'll tell you, the biggest change to our firm with COVID is we went from an in-house intake team that had grown to 12 people, and today we have approximately 30 people all over the world. With only one person in office, one manager in office. And so that dichotomy changed things dramatically. So what are the positives that COVID did is we now have an international hiring pool and a national hiring pool. It makes fun labor law issues, but putting that aside, it really, before we couldn't find somebody down the street. Okay, don't worry about it. We'll find them in some other part of the country. Oh, that's not cost effective. We'll go to Ecuador. Whatever it is, it's been awesome. So I think that COVID in a lot of ways challenged us to be more dynamic and not just rolling out the same playbook.
yeah. So when COVID hit for us, we've been 100% remote since the beginning. So people were like trying to figure out how to go online, and we were like, welcome to the world of remote working and team camaraderie. And so it was so interesting for me to see, and we got inundated with calls because it turns out that business owners care more about their money when it's in complete jeopardy. And so then people only reach out for help when they're scared enough or when they're in enough pain in most situations, right? So COVID created a lot of that pain and uncomfortability. And one of the things that I saw as an opportunity for COVID, and that I would speak to law firm owners who were in complete paralysis and reaction and shutdown mode. But then the others, and it sounds like you're part of this pool of law firm owners, were like, where is the silver lining? What do we have to gain here? Where is the opportunity? How can we use this as a catapult to do better? Because everybody's going through the same thing right now. How can we come out in a better position than we went into it? And I think it shattered a lot of glass ceilings in the legal industry specifically. And you hit on a couple of them. Number one being team core values, establishing actual core values that your team can operate within and create an environment through. And then the second one you hit on was opening our minds to overseas hiring, which from where I'm sitting, I still see a lot of law firm owners struggling with that mindset shift and being comfortable bringing on overseas team members. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'll talk about both. First, on the core values, I think that pre-COVID, so much was done by force of wills because you were always in the office. The leaders could carry the firm. And you didn't, I always made fun of the people with the stupid plaque on the wall that was irrelevant with their core values. And I didn't want that. But I think afterwards we had to be more purposeful about it. And that, things like EOS swept through the legal profession for mid-sized firms that were just really allowed for communication. Before we could be dysfunctional, but we were all sitting in the same office like a family. Everybody's at home, you're not communicating. But when the kid goes off to school, that if you want to communicate, you have to make an extra effort to do so. And maybe it's a Sunday night family call or whatever it is. But the idea is it has to be done with purpose. That's the first piece. The second on international, realizing that was an opportunity. And I think it's analogous to what we're seeing with AI much earlier in that process. What we're trying to figure out is how does it fit into the law firm, build where, what needs to be done hypothetically within the four walls. Not a lot these days for most law firms. Litigation, probably the last thing to fall. The second being, the second piece being, okay, we could be anywhere in the country. And then finally, the idea that this is, it's a harsh thing to talk about, but if you're in Washington, D.C., and you're paying $50,000 a year, much of the country might be an acceptable salary. It's below the poverty line in DC, if somebody's a single parent. And what happens is you end up in a situation where it just doesn't stick. The hires, there's no way there's awful things that go beyond this conversation, but that as a law firm, as a business that wants to retain people, if you're hiring people that by definition don't have a chance of making it at what you're paying them. A lot of discussion about Walmart and how some percentage of Walmart is on government assistance. I think that it's even worse. You may be above a financial assistance, but not really in a position to live, at your one kid's sickness, your one anything away from, and so it doesn't stick. And so I pushed within our financial team, for example, a pretty extended financial team, to bifurcate, keep the people you need to domestically and pay enough to retain. And then those that are doing more mundane things, and figure out what that balance is, because the definition of insanity, we kept hiring people at 50, 55, even 60,000, and nothing would stick. And so we're like, why are we continuously hitting our head into the wall? And that's where all these possibilities became huge.
You just spoke to some of the hardest truths and hardest decisions that a lot of law firm owners avoid. The way that you put that into perspective around, look, be honest with yourself and know your numbers well enough to know, can you even pay somebody a reasonable salary where they're not going to be, in poverty? And can you afford it without going cash broke in your own firm and in your own pocket? Because if not, you really have to make a lot of hard decisions, right? You said you spoke with your finance team and you're like, look, we have to cut some people. And that's hard. Like separating.
And to be fair, we didn't even have to do that because they would break. Meaning the three top people in our finance team have been with us 8, 10, and 12 years. We don't lose people, right? But those other jobs just didn't stick at all. And we were paying market, right? People came, they interviewed, they told us what they said what they were looking for. We paid them the market salary. And it wasn't like they wanted 100,000 we were paying it. This was the going rate for their education level. And that was the big, and within the, in DC, we have a pretty strong, had a pretty strong employment base with all the, all the international organizations, the governmental organizations. There's so much stuff. The alphabet soup keeps stuff going in DC. And so, it's a pretty inflated job market, and the fact that there's lots of different opportunities, especially for administrative work. So it is competitive, and all of a sudden I'm just like, we need something that we know we can count on that will be there. Because as you know, it's not whether you do well in one quarter, it's whether you do this over time. And what can we do that was really sustainable, that wasn't, in business, when you have, if somebody looks at your business and they look at your EBITDA and they're looking, what's your churn rate? That's what somebody's going to ask. That's how your business is determined. Outside of law, everybody talks about churn. We don't talk about the human capital level. It's humbling when you look at as a larger firm, and we take pride at reducing and doing everything we can. There's still churn. Somebody would look at our numbers and be like, oh my God, you lost this many people. I'm like, a certain amount of it is, if the average person in life stays 3 years, especially in the DC market, very transient, lots of opportunities. I see people in markets like Dothan, Alabama, where one mentor works, or Detroit, where there's less opportunity. People are stickier. They don't have as many options. But in DC, there's so many options. And some people come in and out of town that we had to figure out, how do we not be part of that cycle, which A, has a shorter lifespan in general, and B, is, like, if we know that we are not willing to pay a salary that's sustainable, we need to reshuffle the cards and figure something else out.
Yeah, get creative and know your market and know where your boundaries are, for sure. Speaking of, we talked about COVID. Nobody could have seen COVID coming, but it came. And it wasn't the first time that something happened that shook most businesses. And so you also mentioned EOS. For those of you that are not familiar, that is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's outlined in a book by Gino Wickman called Traction. I love the book. We use the system loosely. So these pivots that happened, and it's ironic you mentioned quarterly, right? Like looking at these things quarterly. We have a fractional CFO program, and part of that program is what we refer to as a quarterly pivot. And this is where we lift our heads to 10,000-foot view and we look at how we've come and where our trajectory is, and if we need to change anything, almost in anticipation for the next COVID per se. And you mentioned this on Melissa's podcast episode as well. You said something to the effect of, if you aren't able to anticipate certain things, it's really going to hurt you in the long run. So how do you, in both of your businesses, kind of stay ahead of the pivots, stay ahead of and anticipate the next thing that's going to happen? Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And those that can pivot and that are agile, those are the ones that are going to stay ahead.
I think it's interesting. The AI is one example. What resources are you putting in? I've been leading the charge for a while, and it has been an interesting case study, just like COVID. I think in a few years, what was the order of operations to leverage this amazing life-changing technology into our firms effectively? And it's, in COVID, it shut down. So you had a clean slate. Reminds me of sort of like if you were in New Orleans for the flood, post Katrina, it was clean. They literally used that opportunity to go into certain schools and public defender service and clean out and reinvent 2.0. The problem we have is nothing's on fire. We're still doing fine. So it's like, it's figuring out, what resources we want to put towards that. How much time do you want to spend at the tech show looking at what's next? And how much do you want to wait to say, this buddy's doing it successfully, I'll jump in now. Whenever, one of the things I always talk about, but do myself, is, when somebody talks about this new great thing they're doing at their firm, I go to a ton of masterminds and love them. And one of the rules that should be in every mastermind is a disclosure, and not being able to say something is great until you're doing it for 6 months. I just started doing X. So dangerous, because you're just like a brand new employee. I'm so excited. if you could literally, play blooper reels of all the people you thought were the greatest thing since sliced bread, who came in and shot the bed or stole or did this or did that, you know, it's unbelievable. So I think it's, figuring out that balance of what's there. Other things that we see, the job market for lawyers, finding the lawyers to employ
Mm.
much more difficult. I think that I started to tell the story before. When COVID hit, we moved our intake out of just in office for two reasons. One was it was post COVID, we were remote and everybody could go remote. We were used to it. But the other thing is my model before had been to hire people pre-law school, keep them for 2 years, interview and say, are you going to stay for 2 years? Most people told the truth. And then they would work their asses off and were really smart, work 2 years, would go to law school, and they wanted the recommendation. They wanted the connection with the law firm. It was I would personally call and help with, references for next jobs. And it worked
Mm.
really, really well. Um, just before COVID, law school fell out of fashion, certainly fell out of fashion during COVID. And that what we saw was the people going to law school were not the best and brightest. And we were left with hiring people not going to law school, which ruined our whole model. Because
Mm,
the moment
yeah.
somebody else paid them $2 an hour more, they're like, thank you, goodbye. And that sucked. I mean, I still remember it was a lot of mediocrity, and then we'd lose mediocrity. I mean, that was the worst, right? So by creating something where no one thing, it's pivoting, but it's also, and look, I'm not telling you I'm always early to the game, on this, but like as you see stuff, not ignoring it. We use
Mm.
Craigslist to build both Price Benowitz and to a lesser extent Blue Shark. Early days of both. Price Benowitz grew to probably 25 lawyers on Craigslist. It was amazing. It was free, then cheap, and everybody was there. But one day my guys came to me and said, nobody's coming from Craigslist anymore. It was, whether it was Indeed or something else before that, I can't remember.
ZipRecruiter, Monster. Oh my gosh,
It
all of
was
them.
something where there was a bunch of little things, but people moved away. And it was like I was still old school. It's like, no, just do Craigslist. And even I kept it for a while, even though we were doing all these other things. But it's figuring out when something no longer works, that you are finding something else to do that. And it's different because all of a sudden, those that know, the ZipRecruiters, the Indeeds, the LinkedIns, really effing expensive. And so that changes your bottom line. I mean, we're now, if I acknowledge what we're actually paying per month for recruiting software, we're probably at several $1,000s a month, at least before human labor. It's crazy. And, but it's the cost of doing business. So when it comes back to somebody saying, how do I grow my business? You either need more stuff, you got to staff, you got to do something. If you just, you got to hit one of these levers. And if let's say the limiting factor is human capital and you don't have a methodology to hire,
Mm.
but don't just hire somebody. What does that mean? If you could ask for friends and family or people from work, that's a risk. Maybe not. But otherwise, who's gonna screen people? Who's going to take that first call? Who's going to deal with it? If it's not you, is it somebody who even knows what the hell they're doing? It's not their main job. And so, I still remember when I started, I found a woman. This is back to the Craigslist days, but it would work just as well with Indeed. I found a woman on Craigslist whose job it was to place the ads and then screen people. She would screen people at the 7th and 8th Street Starbucks. If they made the cut, she'd call me or text me, and I would go to the 7th and East Street Starbucks, and they would walk down the street for the next interview. And our office was half a block from there. And if they made it through me, then they would come in. I mean, like it's whatever it takes, but figuring out that you need, like you're saying, the pivot, it's knowing what are the things that you need and knowing that you have some way of putting that together. And, look, it could be a spouse that bails you out and helps you with screening people. Early on, my methodology was I would return calls from any resume that I liked I'm trying to remember what it was, between 8 between 8 and 9:30, I think. It was late. I try to remember what it was. I can't remember if I stopped at 9 or 9:30, but it wasn't nothing. And I kind of had the attitude, A, it was the only time I could do it. If somebody was like, why are you calling me so late? I'm like, you know what? You're probably not right for us as this fast growing firm. But it was the people that did, it was like, it definitely demonstrated I'm going to get it done. Now, ironically, that probably wouldn't work today with the Gen Z mentality where like, I want my 9 to 5. But, it might be a text. You have to figure out what works in what situation, but you have what you have and you have to leverage as best you can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And not only the pivot, but knowing your limitations, right? Like I heard you talk about how you're like, I can't speak to these people. Like it has to be an SOP where I don't have contact with these people. My middle management really has to take that
Oh,
place.
it's much beyond that. It's like
Yeah.
now it's dicta from the companies. Like, I still think that I'm 25 years old and I can speak to the 22-year-old new arrival and it's no big deal. And all of a sudden, I think I walk in the room and they think their dad's yelling at them without even saying anything. So it's a thing.
It,
And I get it. I don't love it, but it is a thing. And one of my magical qualities for good and bad is in about 45 seconds can unpeel the onion of whoever I'm speaking to and find whatever shit is wrong. And it gets bad quickly. And like it just like it's an amazing talent, but it's destructive. And and not that those are not real issues and they do need to be dealt with. But one of my mentors who runs an amazing firm in the South, he says, at any one time, one of my staff members is screwing up. And you know what? I'm okay with that. And it's not like he's okay with it, but if you want to not be a solo practice, you're going to have to get to the point where it's not going to be perfect.
oh,
And that is one of the bigger things. And in one sense, once you have management and eventually middle management in a perfect world, it insulates you from some of that. Because if you start go digging, it's bad
you
in general.
You hit it. Like that was such a profound statement that you just made. You have to be okay with it's not going to be perfect. Things are going to fall through the crack. At any given point, somebody's going to be doing something wrong. And I think that is one of the hardest things for people to truly let go of. And so, where I want to take this now is you kind of break law firm size down into kind of level one, two, three you were talking about. And I find people describe what defines a small law firm or law business, what defines a medium law business, but how do you define it in terms of what got you here won't get you there? For example, for me, small is 0 to 1 million in revenue. And that's what everybody wants to do, right? They don't even think about what it takes or why they want to hit $1 million. It's just like that's the first goal.
It's funny. I don't give a ton of thought to that, but it's a great, great question. I think you see it with a lot of the coaching programs.
Yeah.
There are a number that are really good at getting you from 0 to 1 million, and some that are pretty good from going from 1 to 3. And then when you're over 3, you're sort of in newfound territory that a lot of the mass marketed coaching programs are, I think, less able. Although I think that some have taken a bigger picture towards mindset and looking at the pieces of fundamental culture and things like that. But it is a different playbook in that you're going to get to the point where you don't know everybody's name, and how are you building? And that is why the entrepreneurial operating system or scaling up by Vern Harnish, which is awesome. Any of those, pick something and go with it. But again, this is not when you're 0 to 1 million. It was after the million. But the idea that you have, I think one of the healthiest things you can do, which is talked about in the beginning of track, is create an org chart.
Mm.
And you know what? When you're that small firm, you may be sitting in 7 of the seats. You're the visionary, you're the integrator, you're the person answering the phone and doing the work. And as you add people, you have the pleasure of knocking yourself out of that seat and putting the person you've hired in. And so I think that, one of the things that's really helpful is creating those, charts, even when you're like, why am I creating a chart? There's nobody here. Like that it'll show you where you need to go and what's the next hire. I do a ton of these masterminds, one of which I sort of help mentor some smaller firms that are going through this. And I would say this number one issue I see over and over again is the hiring of the non-lawyer administrator. The continuum. Office manager might be the junior one, right? Then it's a law firm administrator or manager of operations, director of operations. On the top of this curve might be the COO, right? COO is like $250,000 place. But as you grow on that curve, you're basically, and I think that what is the one thing that keep an eye on, because it will allow you to get there, is putting to quote good to great, which has had its issues, get the right person or people on the bus when it comes to that administrative piece. Some rock. I built my firm with a guy who was amazing, sadly, right before COVID, just before COVID, fell off a motorcycle. So COVID was a double hit. That was a double pivot. We lost the rock and then we had COVID. F me. It was really bad. So what I would say is find a rock, invest, build, and allow them to be working on the support pieces as you continue, whether it's legal operations or whether it's marketing or whatever piece you're working on, but allow somebody to be there to execute on things, because you only have so many hours in the day. And the sooner you have that rock, and again, it can literally start with a $60,000 office manager if you're not in DC. But we started with, I don't know what we called her. It was not an office manager. It was our admin. We started with an admin, and she answered the phones when people called phones, like in the old days. She reception. She did paralegaling. She did, anything that needed to be done, with the exception, she didn't touch marketing and she didn't touch intake. I had the bat phone for that. Everything else, the firm, she did. She was magical. She left to go to law school, and it was devastating. Two things I learned. One, she was dating one of our lawyers, and they're now married, and 15 years later, they're doing great. But I tried to replace her with a single person, and that person sucked. Tried another person, that person sucked. It took almost 4 people to replace her. Now she'll tell me, yeah, you had grown. We had grown, but she was so badass that when you get the unicorn, you don't always know it. And that when you have one of those unicorns, when they leave, it's a real cost. And so, that's where the more you have your standard operating procedures, the more you put stuff in place, and you're not just coasting with the unicorn, the better. I've seen it both Blue Shark and Price Benowitz over the years. When a person leaves, it's and the better those pieces are set up, the less of a bump in the road it will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we focus on that $0 to $1 million in revenue mark, and I believe that is the first glass ceiling, because it's the most common goal that I hear. Again, I don't know why $1 million is the goal.
Good goal. If you're a solo and you're starting out, I spoke to this woman the other day. If she was $1 million, she'd be thrilled. So it's because it's also likely more than one lawyer, right? It's not, most solos, can't do everything and hit the million, right?
Exactly.
So, right. In most areas of law, if you get lucky in PI, but generally, looking at it reasonably, if you want to build a foundation, it takes getting out of your shell, having at least one, in some cases, 2 attorneys, and all of a sudden there are skills and flexes that you weren't used to when you're just like, yeah, I show up to work, the phone rings, we do the work, I have a little bit of help. And it's being willing to hire. And, stuff I talk on my podcast with Jay all the time about, I remember going back in the day was, are you hiring a lawyer or a paralegal or an admin? And right out of law school, it's about the same price. And very often it may be an admin that gets you there, and thinking about what do you need for that next piece. If you're undercapitalized, have some administrative help, and then they can prop you up for another $100,000, $200,000 worth of work. But if you really want to get another $500,000 worth of work, you're not going to do it yourself, and you're likely not to do it the first year. Because the first year you got to train, which is more of your time, and it's going to be also the risk they're going to leave much, much higher. So, that's where the brass ring of that third to eighth year would be amazing. But we talked before, it's hard and hard to hire in this market. So some of its history is written by the victor, but some of this is can we put ourselves in a position where we start to do it? And again, all these truisms about that, hiring. This is no different for the person, probably more true for the person getting to the first million. How many people I hired somebody, it didn't work out. I hired again, it didn't work out. It is not uncommon that it's the third hire before it works out. I wish I could wave a magic wand and say no, but I think half of it is you don't know what you need. You think you know, and then you get somebody in place, and sometimes they're a dud. That happens. You don't know how to interview, or somebody got through you. But more often than not, you really think that you need somebody to do the administrative work around you, but that's not really the next hire. You thought it was, and it's not. Whatever it may be, but I see that so, I really thought I needed somebody who was going to be, able to catch everything. And you get somebody with super ADHD where you really need somebody with attention to detail, and you like don't know enough. And again, I'm still making that mistake at 50 lawyers.
Yeah.
Less so on a repeat hire, more so on a new hire, like a new division, a new branch. When something is new, much harder to get it right on the first try.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you have one of those unicorns and it does work out the first, second, or third try, then once they leave, you have to reconfigure that entire position. Like I
True.
have I have a unicorn that I'm thinking of right now, and if when she leaves, it's going to be three different people that are going to be taking her place.
Right. And I also think that you need to then take that, internalize it, and pay more than you want to.
Yes.
Right. Meaning
Yes.
that like
Do
it
the
should be
math.
how
It's
are you
worth
like
it. Yeah.
how are you going to feel the day after they leave? And my attitude, has been for those people, pay them enough that they're not leaving for money. They may leave
Yes.
because they don't want to work for Chelsea, but they aren't going to leave because of money.
Yeah.
You can't help the person who's like, I really want to be a therapist and I want back to therapy school. Okay, like God bless you.
It's a stepping
But
stone. Yes.
no, 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 no. I'm just saying like that. But if it's a question of like that person is never leaving to go to another, day job that is going to, I'm going to make sure that we put them on a pedestal, we invest in them, and we
Yes.
take care of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that I also see, because people will come to me and be like, I need help, but I don't know who that is, and I don't know if I can afford it. And one of my first questions to them stems from what their marketing funnel is looking like. My first question is, are you saying no to new business? Because if so, you have to have a
Right.
billable hire,
Right. No,
right?
of
Like,
course.
or
That's right. But that's what I'm talking about. Knowing what you need next. If you're saying no to
yeah,
business, and are you really saying no to do business?
but
Meaning, are you like, for example, you could, if your goal is profitability, hiring somebody to do the dregs that you like, I'm making this up, but you put your billable hour at 450 an hour as a family lawyer, and you're losing the people that really want 350. Well, you could hire somebody for that, but are you better off, just continuing to push, not have the extra expense of somebody else? I mean, it's knowing whether or not it's the right moment. And one other thought, which I think you'll appreciate, which is when you are ready, whether it's a new associate, new admin, and it's like, man, this is a lot of effing money. And I've been there, not looking at it like it's $110,000 for this attorney, because that scares the hell out of me. But if you look at that as with benefits, it's around 30,000 a month, a quarter, 30,000 a quarter, and 6 months is 60,000. That's much easier to stomach because you'll know if something's a disaster or if it's making you money. And in 6 months, hopefully it's making you money at 3x or better, and you'll be okay. But if you're in a position where you're like, oh my God, that's 110 plus taxes plus benefits, that's a lot of freaking money, you may never pull the trigger. And I think that one of the things we do is if you see that there's work out there that's potential, then you want that work. It's good work. It's not like you think there's work, but there's really not. But if it is, know that you have that first quarter where they're ramping up anyway, and you can figure up and get a running start, and that there's an investment, but it's not the full year salary.
yes. Yeah. And looking at it as just an expense can cost a lot too. So expensive is subjective. And $120,000 salary is nothing if you have $300 to $400,000 in missed revenue opportunity that's on the table without that new hire. But the biggest piece that I see a lot of firms missing to reach that $1 million mark, it's a mindset thing. It's that they're scared to invest in marketing thing, but they don't have, because at $1 million in revenue, typically you need some sort of a marketing system, a marketing funnel, something that is working and you are investing in marketing. Do you see that same thing?
Oh, absolutely. So again, I'll go back to start with the person who I spoke to yesterday. They're doing, 400s. They found a way to send jail mail for criminal. It's a great ROI. God bless, but it's only getting them so far. And they either have to create a mailroom and create a real operation for it, or they need to get serious about digital marketing. Likely for criminal, I'd say there's not much. I mean, I built criminal and have 25 criminal lawyers because of digital. Like if there's no better way to do that, in PI, there are lots of ways to make a buck. But social doesn't work as well in criminal. TV is really expensive. Like billboards aren't going to do it. Like you need volume at the time of somebody's need who's privately searching versus other areas. And I think that, like, I always ask people, okay, you want to be $1 million firm. What are you spending on marketing? And that's very telling, right? A lot of truisms we hear, which is, 10% maybe baseline, 20% is serious, 10% is modest growth, 20% is great, is significant growth. In the PI world, I see people spending a third or more, just in order to, get that machine going. And so it
Mm.
has to do with how much you're willing to invest and how good you are at it.
Yeah, and having a realistic expectation of when and how you're going to realize an ROI and not giving up too soon or writing it off because it hasn't produced according to your expectations.
Couldn't agree more.
It's a long game for sure.
Well, it is, and it's a question: are you willing to, okay, like, and also, you want to just be $1 million firm, or are you trying to be a $2 or $3 million firm? Because if you are, then you want to put certain foundations in and build certain funnels, not like click funnels, but like you want to be able to, have an organically optimized website that can produce a return over time. Are you going to open more satellite offices? Are you going to play the LSA game and be really good at answering the calls? Whatever it may be. And the paid search is great until it's not. If you can get an ROI, God bless. But you may wake up one day and say the ROI is not there. Pivot. Okay, well, PPC is not working. LSAs, we'll give that a shot. Google's ever doing everything possible. LSA is not profitable. They're allowing reduced challenges to almost nothing. They've reduced. They're now allowing you to ask multiple people at once. So it's like, shared lead services like internet brands. I mean, it's not easy. So to me, it's, are you willing to invest? Can you stay away from the scammers? Easier said than done. And there's so many out there. And I think it's also being savvy enough to know that the low dollar, well sold products, and this is no different than financial services anywhere, if you're paying too little, even though
Mm.
you like the number, if you do the math on something, if somebody's in financial services and they're offering you something for $1,000 a month, and you think to yourself, I'm paying, if somebody's running a business, they're going to make 25% margin plus or minus, right? So they have $750 in which to help me during that month, right? And if you think that way, and they're telling you that you're going to get, I'm making this up, 10 hours of resources, and they're domestic, there's a good chance it's just not true.
Yeah.
And not, being a savvy consumer, what are you getting? Nobody wants,
Yeah.
it's reverse engineering what you're buying. If you're trying to do SEO and you're paying less than 3,000 a month, it's very unlikely. And at 3,000, you're scratching the surface. It sucks. SEO is anywhere from 4 to 7,000 baseline to do real authoritative building content, building links, local optimization, all of that good stuff. And if you're sitting there and you're paying, like I got a thing for $2,250 and there's this and there's that, it may sound great, but more light. And look, there are people that get lucky who find a service that, like, oh, you know what? They did what needed to be done, and God bless. But very often I get people coming to me and saying, hey, I'm not getting what I need. I'm like, well, what are you paying? And you're like, hey, I want to be $1 million organization. I'm paying $2,000 on my digital. Like, it's, do you want to play in the big leagues, or do you want to just check the box?
It's like that three-part diagram. You can only ever get two of the three: fast, cheap, good, out of a service. And so you really got to, think about what you're getting. And so what I'm hearing from you and what I know from my experience is getting to $1 million requires a huge mindset shift. It requires strategically jumping off of cliffs, and that's what it feels like, and letting go, right? And I can really appreciate that. And I know we're coming up to, yes, I know we're coming up to the end of our time. This has been such a natural conversation. I haven't gone through any of my notes that I wanted to ask. The last thing, though, I want to talk about is I recognize the importance of you are the sum of the 5 people that you hang around most. And you have referenced a lot of groups, masterminds, programs, people that you share time and space with. So I think you understand the importance of that as well. Can you share these resources if for law firm owners that are listening, that want to grow and scale, that are ready to make the hard decisions and do the hard things? Where should they be? Who should they be listening to?
I think a lot of it has to do with what area. Are your guys mostly personal injury or not personal injury?
Not personal injury.
Okay, so there are some great dedicated personal injury groups. Outside of that, I think that's a great question. I'm a big fan, and you'll see in many of the more advanced groups a large number of personal injury lawyers. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because while their issues are slightly different, they are thinking more like a business,
Yes.
and less as practitioners. So John Fisher runs a mastermind called the Mastermind Experience. It's cheap. It's usually about $1,500 and maybe $1,000 for first-time attendees. And there's one coming up in DC on the 18th and 19th. We're doing a pre-day that's actually like held at Blue Shark with Andrew Finkelstein, one of the greatest business minds of lawyering anywhere. Just from the operations side as well as marketing and everything else. And intake and AI are going to be talked about. Again, to me, I don't want to be in a place where you're commiserating with other people, but you want to sort of raise the game. So to me, it goes off 3 to 4 times a year. It's a limited buy-in. And I love that from the point of view of it has people in there that have massive firms like myself and a few others, and has a lot of people that are trying to get from 400,000 to $1 million. And the great part is it's sort of a fraternity, sorority, where people work together to help each other build and grow. And I've loved it. And to me, that's a pretty special place.
Amazing. Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I think the theme of the conversation is act like the firm you want to become, not the firm you are, right? And see the hard decisions before they come, and keep your eye and your ear out there as much as you possibly can.
And I'll tell everybody listening, that is very eloquent, and I'm sure it's true. It is very hard to hear when you're in the trenches. So while those words are true, and God bless, know that it's one step at a time. Always look to make things 1 degree better, but don't try to take everything on at once, because then nothing will happen.
Yeah, so true. So true. And mic drop. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chelsea. This is awesome.
That's a wrap on today's episode with Seth Price. Here are a few key takeaways that you can carry forward with you. Growth is not about chasing more revenue. Marketing requires real investment. If you're spending $2,000 a month on SEO and expecting $1 million results, you're lying to yourself. Unicorn employees are rare. Don't build your firm around one person. Build systems and SOPs that outlast turnover. And scaling requires mindset shifts. Hire before it feels comfortable. Market like the firm you want to become. And don't chase every shiny object. Stick to what moves the needle. You can find Seth Price at Blue Shark Digital and Price Benowitz LLP. We'll drop the links to his sites in the show notes. And if you got value from this episode, share it with another law firm owner who needs to hear the truth about scaling, and leave us a review so we can keep bringing you candid conversations just like this one. I'm Chelsea, and this is Law Firm Money Matters, where it's always and never about the money. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the CSG Law Firm Podcast. If today's conversation sparks something for you, an idea, a challenge, or even a little discomfort, that's exactly the point. We're here to rethink the way law firm owners approach money, leadership, and growth. If you're ready to dive deeper, connect with me and my team and learn more about Core Solutions Group and what we do, head on over to our website in the show notes, yourcoresolution.com. Because sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective and the right people in your corner. Until next time, keep building with intention, lead with clarity, and remember, the numbers tell the story, but you get to write the next chapter.